Imagine you are like standing in a massive stadium, right?
Okay. Yeah.
The music swells up. Thousands of people rise to their feet in unison. They put their hands over their hearts, and they pledge their ultimate allegiance to this piece of brightly colored fabric waving in the wind.
Right. A national anthem at a sports game.
Exactly. And, I mean, we call that civic duty. We call it patriotism. But what if that exact ritual, that specific act of pledging loyalty to a national flag, was mathematically and spiritually equivalent to worshiping a golden calf?
Wow. That is quite the opening thought.
Right. Like, what if, rather than being a responsible citizen,
Yeah.
you were literally bowing to a false god, a modern idol designed to essentially trap you in a system of mental slavery?
It is a staggering premise, especially to throw at anyone raised in a modern nation state because, most of the world looks at a flag and just sees a symbol.
Yeah.
A symbol of shared history or maybe just a geographic boundary or a set of constitutional ideals. We basically categorize our devotion to our country as entirely separate from our religious or spiritual lives.
But today, for this deep dive, we are examining a document that completely obliterates that separation. It just tears it down.
It really does.
We have this highly detailed, incredibly uncompromising ideological flowchart. It is titled Fact of Allah's Existence. And it doesn't just suggest that modern nationalism is problematic.
No, it goes way further than that.
Yeah, it uses this series of really rigid logical gates to argue that the whole concept of country first is a direct usurpation of natural law. It makes a case that the secular nation-state is operating as a literal idol, what it calls the country-state flag god idol.
And to understand how it arrives at a conclusion that heavy, we're going to trace the architecture of this flowchart from its absolute base assumptions all the way down to its final geopolitical conclusions.
It is such an extraordinary look into a pure, unfiltered Islamic political philosophy.
Absolutely. We are going to explore how this worldview categorizes knowledge, how it views the mechanics of lawmaking, and its devastating critique of modern global economics.
Right, specifically looking at the concept of riba, or usury.
Yeah, and its ultimate call for a singular, unified global system.
Now, whether you are a student of political science, someone fascinated by theology, or you are just joining us because you are insanely curious about how different belief systems construct reality from the ground up, this document is basically a masterclass in philosophical engineering.
It really is. But before we take a single step into this flowchart, we need to establish a very firm ground rule for you, the listener, and for ourselves.
Yes, essential.
The source material we are dissecting today contains blisteringly strong critiques of systems most of the world lives under right now. It attacks nationalism, it invalidates the core premises of secular democracy.
It critiques modern capitalism.
Exactly. And it touches on very specific societal laws.
So our role here is strictly as your guides to the text. We are not taking sides.
Right. We are totally impartial here.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints presented in this document, and we are not condemning them either. We are not taking a left-wing stance, a right-wing stance, a religious stance, or a secular one.
Our goal is entirely analytical. We just want to impartially unpack the logic of the arguments as they are presented, letting you understand the text on its own terms.
Because if the document argues that a specific philosophical starting point inevitably leads to the rejection of the modern nation-state, we want to examine the mechanics of that argument.
We want to understand the why and the how behind these assertions, setting aside our own preconceptions of how global politics operates.
So let's jump straight to the top of the flowchart, because to build a political system, you need a foundation.
You do.
And this document starts with a concept called Din-e-Fitrat, which it translates to the religion of nature, referencing chapter 30, verse 30 of the Quran.
Yeah.
But what immediately stands out isn't really the religious terminology, it is the bold underlined text right next to it. It says, Fitrat of Allah is not a belief, it's a fact.
And that simple sentence fundamentally rewrites the rules of engagement for how the West typically discusses theology. Well, in our modern post-Enlightenment world, we have universally categorized religion as a belief system, right? It sits in the realm of the subjective.
Right, like you have your truth, I have mine.
Exactly. The societal consensus is that you have your internal beliefs, your neighbor has theirs, and we build this neutral, secular public square where all those subjective feelings can safely coexist.
But this flowchart is basically refusing to sit in that subjective category. By calling it a fact, It is demanding to be treated like physics.
Yeah, that is a great way to put it.
I was trying to wrap my head around this, and it feels similar to how we treat basic mathematics. If this source is arguing that its spiritual framework is an objective reality exactly like 1 + 1 = 2, then framing it as a personal belief is ridiculous.
It would be, yeah.
If I tell you I personally believe in gravity, you'd look to me like I was crazy. Gravity doesn't care about my belief. It just acts on me regardless.
And the flowchart uses almost that exact analogy. It states clearly, where there is smoke, there is fire, or 1 + 1 = 2, calling them laws of nature.
Wow.
It is binding the spiritual reality of the universe directly to observable physical phenomena. And to bolster this, the text cites a famous hadith which states, "No child is born but upon fitrat."
Meaning what, exactly?
The argument is that the default, uncorrupted state of human consciousness is perfectly aligned with this divine physical reality. You are born knowing the math, essentially.
I can see how that changes the entire trajectory of the document.
Yeah.
If you view your foundational text not as, like, moral suggestions, but as the literal base code of reality, then breaking those rules isn't just a moral failing.
No, it is not.
It is not a sin in the way a Westerner might think of a private moral lapse.
It becomes an unnatural act. The document points out that Mother Nature goes towards unity to avoid duplication and waste. The universe is an incredibly efficient, unified system.
Right, you don't have two competing laws of thermodynamics battling it out in the same physical space.
Exactly. There is unity. Therefore, when a human being or a human society deviates from the fitrat of Allah, they are introducing systemic waste and destruction into an otherwise perfect system.
So they're trying to build a bridge while willfully ignoring the laws of load-bearing physics.
That is exactly it. And the bridge will collapse, not because God is arbitrarily angry, but because the builder ignored the physical reality of the universe.
And the flowchart actually challenges the reader on this point. It asks a rhetorical question. It says, how come, looking at the universe, a person cannot realize the existence and the might of Allah?
It is essentially framing secularism or atheism not as a valid philosophical alternative, but as a failure of basic observation.
Like walking outside at noon and failing to notice the sun.
Right, which sets the stage for the next massive philosophical leap the document takes, if we accept the text's premise.
That this divine law is the immutable physics of the universe.
Yes. Then the immediate question becomes, how does human society actually function within that reality? How do we build governments, economies, and infrastructure?
This is where the flowchart visually splits. From that singular unifying law of nature, it divides all human endeavor into two distinct streams.
Right, the left and the right sides.
On the left side of the diagram, we have revealed knowledge, which is defined strictly as Quranic principles. And then on the right side, we have acquired knowledge.
And this right side includes a fascinating grouping.
It really does. It lumps statecraft working policies and procedures right next to science and technology, specifically mentioning things like aircraft and spacecraft.
Let's focus on the revealed knowledge side first, because the language it uses is highly deliberate. It states, the Quran, the absolute truth, cannot be changed. But then it adds a crucial qualifier. It says, the Quranic principles are harmless because they are based on nature.
Harmless. That implies that anything outside of those principles carries the inherent risk of harm.
Exactly, because it ties back to the concept of avoiding systemic waste. A law of nature cannot inherently harm the system it governs.
Right. The orbit of the planets doesn't harm the solar system.
It sustains it. The document is arguing that implementing these revealed principles in society cannot cause structural damage to humanity because the principles in humanity share the exact same base code, the fitrat.
Okay, but then we look at the right side of the split. Acquired knowledge. By grouping statecraft, meaning politics, administration, the bureaucracy of running a country.
Yeah.
By grouping that with building an airplane, the source is making a profound statement about the nature of government. It is stripping the mysticism out of politics.
It really is.
It is saying that building a tax collection system or municipal zoning board is fundamentally no different than engineering a rocket. It is just a tool mankind develops through trial, error, and intellect.
It reduces statecraft to neutral technology. And that neutrality is critical. An airplane is an incredible piece of acquired knowledge. It demonstrates human mastery over aerodynamics.
Right.
But an airplane has no inherent moral compass.
But I have to push back on this clean division. In theory, treating statecraft like engineering sounds wonderfully rational.
Sure.
But in practice, politics is never that clean. When you build a spacecraft, you do the math, and it either achieves orbit or it explodes. It is empirical. But human politics is inherently messy. It is driven by ego, by corruption, by subjective desires. How can the flowchart casually lump the chaos of human governance into the same category as aerospace engineering?
Well, that is the exact vulnerability the flowchart addresses next. It introduces a vital directional node that sits directly above acquired knowledge. It says, ideology, evil or good, directs the acquired knowledge.
Okay, so the tool is neutral, but the hand wielding it is not.
Exactly. The acquired knowledge, the bureaucracy, the courts, the infrastructure, that is just the engine. The ideology is the steering wheel.
Oh, I see.
If you build an airplane, you can load it with medical supplies and drop them to a famine-struck region, or you can load it with munitions and bomb a civilian population. The engineering of the plane didn't change at all. The ideology directing the plane changed.
So applying that to a government, building a massive bureaucratic database is acquired knowledge. Using that database to ensure everyone gets clean drinking water is directing it with a good ideology. Using that same database to persecute a minority group is directing it with an evil ideology.
And this is where the two streams of the flowchart must interact. The source argues that this separation between immutable revealed knowledge and pragmatic acquired knowledge is perfectly functional, but only under one absolute non-negotiable condition.
Which is?
The acquired knowledge of statecraft must be subjugated to and directed by the revealed knowledge of the Quran.
Because if the revealed knowledge is the literal physics of the universe, and you direct your statecraft using any other ideology, you are pointing your airplane straight into the ground.
Precisely. You are going to cause that systemic harm we talked about.
And the text issues a direct challenge to anyone who thinks they can invent a better steering wheel. It brings up Allah's challenge, referencing chapter 2, verse 23. It refers to the Quran as a living miracle, and boldly states, it is impossible for any constitutional principle to produce a principle comparable to the Quran.
It is basically saying to the great political philosophers of history, to Locke, to Rousseau, to the framers of modern constitutions, you can use all your acquired knowledge to try and engineer a better moral foundation for society, but you will fail every single time because you are trying to out-engineer the architect of the universe.
It is an assertion of ultimate functional superiority. But it also introduces a massive logistical problem, and the flowchart navigates right into it.
Right, because history is just a long record of human societies changing their rules.
Exactly. Populations evolve, economies shift, new situations arise that weren't present 1,000 years ago. The world is completely saturated with laws that directly contradict the Quranic principles this text considers immutable.
Very true.
So if these principles are the unchangeable laws of physics, how does this framework address the actual legal mechanics of a society wanting to change the law?
The document creates a jurisdictional logic gate that is honestly airtight. The flowchart reads, according to the Fitrat of Allah, the rule is to have an equivalent or higher authority to change or replace the law.
Let's use a corporate analogy to ground this because it maps perfectly to how we understand legal jurisdiction.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine a massive global corporation. A middle manager, let's say a regional director of sales, decides they don't like the founding charter written by the CEO. Can that middle manager just take a pen, cross out the CEO's charter, and write their own?
Legally, no. They lack the jurisdiction. To change the foundational charter, you need an equivalent authority, perhaps another CEO taking over, or a higher authority like the board of directors stepping in to overrule the executive.
That is precisely the argument the flowchart is making, but on a cosmic scale. In this framework, the law is not a social construct invented by humans trying to get along.
No, the law is divine property.
Therefore, a human being, simply by virtue of being human, inherently lacks the jurisdiction to amend it.
And the flowchart asks the ultimate consequent question. Is it possible to replace Allah's laws as law of the land without false God? The arrow points down to a definitive no.
But look at what that no implies for the modern world. If you accept the premise that divine law is the absolute ceiling of authority, then any human attempt to pass a law contradicting it isn't just an administrative update.
It is theological treason.
Yeah? It requires claiming an authority equal to or greater than the divine.
Returning to your corporate analogy, if that middle manager wants to rewrite the charter and they can't get the CEO to do it, their only option is to stage a hostile takeover, lock the real CEO out of the building, and install a fake puppet CEO who will rubber stamp the middle manager's new rules.
But here is where this logic gate completely upends the Western political consensus. In a modern democracy, the authority to change the law is derived from the consent of the governed.
Right, we the people.
Exactly. If a massive majority, let's say 99% of the population, votes to pass a new law, that vote grants the action legal and moral legitimacy. Does this flowchart recognize that consensus?
It completely invalidates it. Under this framework, 99% of a human population is still just a collection of humans.
Wow, so the numbers don't matter.
Not at all. A billion people voting together does not miraculously generate an authority equivalent to the creator of the universe. The vote is jurisdictionally void. If the entire planet voted to legalize something prohibited by the Fitrat, the action remains an illegal usurpation.
So democracy, when it is used to legislate against divine principles, is logically impossible within this text without committing idolatry.
Correct.
Which leads us to the most provocative, visually arresting part of this entire document. If humans cannot change the law without installing a fake CEO, without a false god, who or what is the false god that the modern world has installed to sign the paperwork?
We follow the flowchart down from that definitive no, and we arrive at a stark, unblinking diagnosis of the modern world order. A large box reads, "Godless world has replaced Allah by country-state flag god idol."
Country-state flag god idol. It explicitly states that modern constitutions make laws in the name of country-state flag god idol and notes that it is a non-living thing.
Yes.
This is where we have to really dig into the text, because to a secular listener, calling a flag an idol sounds like hyperbole. It sounds like poetry, not political science.
To understand why it's not hyperbole, we have to look at the Arabic terms underlying this critique: shirk and taghut.
Okay, let's break those down.
In traditional Islamic theology, shirk is the sin of idolatry or polytheism, associating partners with God. Taghut refers to anything that is worshipped, obeyed, or followed in excess of the boundaries set by God.
But when most people hear idolatry, they picture ancient civilizations. They picture the Israelites at Mount Sinai bowing down to a golden calf, or temples filled with marble statues of Zeus and Athena.
Yeah, they picture a literal, physical ritual.
And the flowchart is demanding that we mature our definition of an idol. Idolatry, in this advanced political context, isn't about burning incense in front of a statue. It is about the ultimate attribution of authority. Who has the final say over what is right and wrong?
Exactly. And the text cites chapter 18, verse 26. He does not let anyone share in his command. If the Creator is the ultimate owner and ruler of reality, then the law of the land is exclusively his domain.
So when a modern parliament sits down and passes a piece of legislation that permits something explicitly forbidden by divine law, the text uses riba, which is interest, and LGBT laws as its examples. How do they justify it? The politicians don't stand at a podium and declare, "We are passing this law because we are literal gods." That would be absurd.
No, they don't claim personal divinity. They claim the authority of the state.
Right.
They say, we are passing this law in the name of the Republic, or by the authority of the Constitution, or for the good of the nation.
And right there, the state becomes the entity sharing in the command.
Precisely. The state becomes the conceptual idol. It is the invisible entity granted the ultimate authority to permit the breaking of natural law.
And how does that invisible concept manifest in the physical world? Through its symbol, the national flag. The flag is the golden calf of the modern era.
This brings up what I consider one of the most conceptually dense ideas in the source material, something we can look at as the three-in-one God of secularism.
Okay, I love this breakdown. How does it work?
You have the concept, which is the nation state. You have the physical idol, which is the flag. But a flag is just a piece of dyed cloth. The flowchart itself asks the literal question, can God idol speak? And the line points directly to no.
So if the idol is mute, how does it govern? It can't draft a tax code. It can't sign an executive order.
Right. If an idol is silent, it requires a priesthood to speak on its behalf. The flowchart moves from, can God idol speak? No, straight into a box labeled, mouthpiece of God idol, lawgiver.
And who makes up this priesthood? Who is the mouthpiece?
The document identifies this mouthpiece as taghut, citing chapter 4, verse 60. In this modern context, the taghut are the human leaders, the lawmakers, the parliamentarians, the Supreme Court justices.
The people actually pulling the levers.
Exactly. They are the individuals who draft and execute legislation against Allah's laws.
The text includes a fascinating explanatory note here. It says, the reason legislation is done in the name of country-state flag god idol by our leaders, taghut, is because the Quran cannot be amended.
It is the ultimate psychological loophole. Imagine a politician standing in front of a crowd and saying, I have decided to amend the divine laws of the universe to allow banks to charge predatory interest rates on your homes.
People would lose their minds. The public would instantly recognize the arrogance, the heresy, and reject them.
But if that same politician stands in front of a giant national flag, puts their hand over their heart and says, for the economic prosperity of our great nation to secure our homeland's future in the global market, we are passing this Banking Reform Act.
The public doesn't just accept it. They applaud it as patriotism.
Because the Tagad have successfully shifted the jurisdictional authority away from the immutable divine text and onto the secular idol, the citizens don't realize that the law of nature has been violated because the mouthpiece assured them that the state authorized it. It is a brilliant systemic sleight of hand.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the flowchart contextualizes this sleight of hand by drawing a massive historical parallel.
Yeah.
It looks at how human governance has evolved,
Yeah.
and it sees the exact same usurpation wearing different clothes.
Yes.
At the bottom of this section, it contrasts two systems of rule. First, it brings up the divine rights of king.
This is the historical model we saw in medieval Europe and elsewhere, where the church and the state were unified under a monarch. The king, like Louis XIV of France, who famously declared, I am the state, claimed to be the literal appointed voice of God on earth.
Right.
The monarch merged the role of the mouthpiece and the divine authority into one physical person.
It was a very convenient system for the kings. My laws are God's laws, so if you rebel against my taxes, you are rebelling against heaven.
Very convenient.
And most modern people would look at the end of that era, the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, the separation of church and state, as a massive leap forward for human freedom. We got rid of the tyrants claiming divine right.
But the flowchart shatters that modern self-congratulation. It compares the divine rights of king directly to the modern divine rights of people, the democratic system. According to the internal logic of this document, both systems are equally flawed. They just utilize different mechanisms of usurpation.
How does democracy usurp the authority in the same way a medieval king did?
The divine right of kings usurped authority by claiming a fraudulent, direct connection to the true God. Democracy usurps authority by constructing a completely new, fake God, the nation-state, and granting it the right to rule in its own name.
I see.
In both scenarios, the ultimate legislative authority is ripped away from the immutable federat, the laws of nature, and handed over to flawed, ideological human beings operating their acquired knowledge.
It just strips away all the pomp, the circumstance, and the self-righteousness of modern governance. But that brings us to an incredibly uncomfortable question for anyone living today. If the nation-state is an idol, and the politicians are just its priesthood, what does that make the citizens? What are the psychological and societal implications of living your entire life under this system?
That leads us to the profound critique in Section 5 of the flowchart. It examines the mechanisms of loyalty that hold this system together. It contrasts the nature of allegiances.
Okay.
In what it calls the godless world, the document states that an oath is given to idle wind, directly referencing the Quranic concept of Iblis, or Satan. And it states that allegiance is given to a piece of cloth.
Oath is given to idle wind. That is such a haunting phrase. Let's really think about what that means. When a child stands up in a classroom, places their hand over their heart, and recites a pledge of allegiance, the text is arguing that they're swearing loyalty to a phantom.
Exactly.
They're pledging their lives to an illusion orchestrated by a satanic framework, a framework deliberately designed to distract them from the objective reality of the universe.
To understand the weight of that, we must look at the alternative the flowchart presents. It states, in Khalafat State, oath is given to Allah and allegiance is to Khalifa.
So the contrast is total. An oath to the ultimate immutable fact of reality, and allegiance to a living, accountable human leader whose sole restricted job is to implement that reality without altering it.
Oh, yes. But the text goes much deeper into why the secular oath is so insidious. It introduces the thematic focus of the mental slavery of the satanic system.
Mental slavery, that's a heavy term.
It is. The flowchart asserts that any principles or laws based on anything other than Deen Fitrat are based on myth, citing verse 10:32.
Okay, let's stop and unpack this word myth.
Yeah.
Because in the modern discourse, the rules are usually reversed. The secular world looks at religious texts and says, those are beautiful myths, metaphors, ancient stories. And the secular world views its own creations, its constitutional frameworks, its economic theories, its human rights declarations as the absolute peak of rational, acquired intellect.
This document aggressively flips that script. It argues that the secular world has it completely backward. The divine law, the Quranic principle, is the objective, rational fact of nature. It is the math. It is the physics.
Which means that the idea that an invisible border drawn on a map by politicians after a war, or a piece of fabric, or a 51% parliamentary majority, has the physical or moral authority to permit something that violates nature. Sorry, that is the fiction. That is the dangerous, made-up myth.
And it is not a harmless myth. The text explicitly labels these secular principles as unnatural and harmful, and it provides two specific, damning examples of the harm caused by these secular myths: riba, which is usury or interest, and slavery.
We really need to spend significant time on riba because it is the engine of the modern global system, and it is absolutely central to the flowchart's critique.
It is the core of their economic argument.
Right. In Islamic theology, riba is not just a financial faux pas. It is considered one of the gravest sins. It is frequently described as engaging in a literal war with Allah and his messenger. But if you look at the secular world today, interest-based banking is the bedrock of civilization. The entire global economy, corporate expansion, sovereign debt, individual mortgages, student loans, runs entirely on the engine of riba.
Which means, following the logic of the source, the entire global economy is operating on a massive, unnatural fiction that actively defies the laws of physics.
Let's look at why riba is categorized as harmful and unnatural.
Well, in nature, true growth requires effort, risk, and tangible creation. But riba allows money to simply multiply itself over time without effort, without shared risk, and without producing real value.
It is just money making money.
Exactly. It inherently transfers wealth from those who labor to those who simply hold capital.
And the text links riba directly to slavery. It says riba and slavery in the same breath. It's making a profound statement about systemic economic subjugation.
It is defining riba as the modern mechanism of enslavement. In the past, humans were physically shackled. Today, they are economically shackled.
Yeah, you are born into a nation-state that demands you participate in an unnatural economic model just to survive.
You must take out loans with compounding interest for your education, to put a roof over your head, to afford medical care. You spend your entire life working to pay off the interest on money that was basically created out of thin air by a central banking system.
And the true horror of the mental slavery is that the citizens don't see it as slavery. The Taghut, the mouthpieces of the state, tell you that this is just economics. It's just acquired knowledge.
Right.
And through patriotism, through those oaths to the idle wind, the state conditions you to defend the very system that is exploiting you. You are convinced to willingly serve a system that actively fights against the natural order of social justice.
This is where the concept of sunnah money serves as the vital counterpoint in this philosophical framework, even if it's implicitly understood within the rejection of riba.
What exactly is sunnah money?
Sunnah money refers to currency with intrinsic natural value like gold and silver, exchanged equitably without the unnatural inflation of fiat currency or the parasitic drain of interest.
Ah, so it has real physical grounding.
Exactly. Sunnah money aligns with the fitrat, with the natural balanced order of the universe. Fiat currency, printed at will by the state idol and loaned out with riba, is the ultimate tool of the satanic system of mental slavery.
The critique is just breathtaking in its scale. It isn't just saying capitalism has flaws. It is arguing that the fundamental structure we call civilization, the nation-state, its fiat economy, its secular laws, is an elaborate, bureaucratized mechanism of exploitation, masked by the powerful illusion of national pride.
The flowchart summarizes this by stating that the rest, meaning everything outside of the divine law, is just fiction and stories in the name of acquired knowledge.
It really forces you to reevaluate the very phrase, country first. If the country is actually an idol, a fiction designed to authorize unnatural exploitation through laws like riba, then putting country first means placing an idol before the welfare of humanity and before the literal laws of nature.
It is systemic self-destruction.
So, this brings us to a massive void. If the current global system, this patchwork of nearly 200 diverse nation-states, each with its own flag, its own constitution, and its own central bank, if all of that is just a collection of fragmented idols enforcing harmful myths, what is the source's alternative? How does humanity actually realign with the base code of reality?
That requires us to look at the culmination of the flowchart in Section 6. The document leads to a singular, logically inevitable conclusion that completely erases the current geopolitical map.
Okay, where does it take us?
It returns us to the very first physical law established at the top of the page. Mother Nature going towards unity to avoid duplication and waste.
Right. If the universe doesn't have competing laws of physics, human society shouldn't have competing laws of governance.
The text applies that physical law directly to global geopolitics. It declares, according to Dini Fitrat, the Quran works under one leader. There can't be two Khalafat states on planet Earth since there is only one Quran.
One truth demands one unified geopolitical entity. It is mathematically elegant within its own framework.
It is.
If 1 + 1 = 2 everywhere on Earth, you don't need borders. You don't need a French 1 + 1 and a Japanese 1 + 1. You just need one global system that acknowledges the math.
The existence of multiple states, even multiple Islamic states, is logically incompatible with the premise of the birth chart. Nationalism, by its very definition, divides humanity. The nation-state model inherently requires duplication.
Right, you need multiple armies, multiple constitutions, multiple border walls, multiple legal systems.
And from the perspective of this source, that duplication is the ultimate systemic waste. It is a violent violation of nature's drive towards unity.
And what is the purpose of this single unified entity? Is it just authoritarian control?
Not at all.
Because the text specifies that the axis of Quran is Din-e-Haq, which it defines as the system of social justice of Islam. And it has an incredibly striking detail. It notes that this is a system where even a dog should not die of thirst.
That single line completely reorients the tone of the document. Up to this point, the text has been rigidly legalistic, architectural, and systemic. But that phrase introduces ultimate compassion.
It really softens the whole thing.
The entire purpose of this rigorous framework, the immutable laws, the rejection of the flag idol, the single unified caliphate, is not power for the sake of power. It is to create a perfect, flawless system of social justice that extends its protection all the way down to a thirsty animal on the street.
It's arguing that true justice is impossible in a world divided by false idols and corrupted by riba, because the system itself is designed to exploit. Only by aligning with the Fitrat can you guarantee justice. And it notes that Shariat, or Islamic law, solely supports this system. Shariat is the protective shell designed to keep the society aligned with nature so that social justice can actually flourish.
To drive this profound critique of the modern world home, the source includes quotes at the very bottom of the document from Dr. Muhammad Iqbal.
Oh yeah, we need to talk about him.
For context, Dr. Iqbal was a highly influential philosopher, poet, and politician in British India during the early 20th century, and he is widely regarded as the spiritual father of Pakistan.
Including Iqbal is a brilliant rhetorical move because he was deeply educated in Western philosophy, but remained fiercely critical of its geopolitical application. The flowchart highlights two specific points from him.
What's the first one?
The first point noted states, the inner core of the present Western civilization is purely Quranic.
Now, at first glance, that sounds like a massive contradiction to everything we've just discussed. How could Western civilization, which the flowchart views as the epicenter of secular nation-states and global riba, be purely Quranic in its core?
But it perfectly aligns with the flowchart's division of knowledge from earlier. What Iqbal recognized, and what the source is affirming, is that the West successfully mastered acquired knowledge.
Right, the science and tech side.
They embraced science, technology, organizational efficiency, and the observation of nature. These practical, rational tools actually align perfectly with the Quranic mandate to observe and utilize the universe. The West built an incredibly efficient engine.
But an engine still needs a steering wheel.
And that brings us to the second, much more famous quote from Dr. Iqbal included in the text. It is a line of profound poetry in Urdu. Intazakudan mein bara sabse watan hai, jo parhan iska hai, wo mazab kakafan hai.
Translating poetry is always difficult, but let's unpack the devastating meaning behind those lines, because they perfectly encapsulate the entire country, state, flag, god, idol argument.
Roughly translated, the first line means, among the fresh or new gods, the biggest of all is the homeland. Among the new gods, the biggest is the homeland. He is directly acknowledging that humanity didn't evolve past idolatry, or we just modernized it. We traded stone statues for borders and national identities.
And the second line completes the critique. And its garment is the shroud of religion. This means that nationalism clothes itself in the trappings of ultimate meaning.
Wow.
The state demands the kind of absolute sacrifice, unquestioning devotion, and sacred reverence that was historically reserved only for the divine. It becomes a religion unto itself.
But it is a religion of death.
Exactly. A shroud is what you wrap a corpse in.
Hmm.
The idol of nationalism suffocates true, natural, spiritual reality.
It is the perfect synthesis of the entire deep dive. The West built an incredible machine of acquired knowledge, but they handed the keys to the engine over to the idol of nationalism.
Yes.
And because that idol is a false god, a myth that requires things like economic exploitation and mental slavery to function, the machine ultimately fails the test of universal social justice, no matter how shiny the technology is.
In the eyes of this worldview, it is a profound human tragedy. All that potential, all that natural alignment in science and organization, corrupted and weaponized by the mental slavery of the nation-state system.
Let's take a breath and look at the sheer scale of the journey this document took us on. We started with a premise so simple it fits on a post-it note, that the fitrat of Allah is an objective, unchangeable fact of physics, exactly like 1 + 1 = 2.
And from that single seed of logic, we watched an entire geopolitical philosophy bloom. We saw how human knowledge must be split into the immutable laws of nature versus the human-acquired tools of statecraft.
We trace the jurisdictional logic that proves, within this framework, that humans can never possess the authority to rewrite divine law without committing theological treason.
Which revealed the document's most striking diagnosis: that modern constitutional democracies, by claiming the ultimate right to legislate in the name of the state, are functioning as a three-in-one god of secularism.
Aye.
The nation is the concept, the flag is the silent idol, and the politicians are the takert, the mouthpieces passing unnatural laws like riba that violently disrupt the order of the universe.
We explored how this system demands oaths to idle wind, trapping humanity in a mental slavery, where they willingly participate in their own economic subjugation.
And finally, we arrived at the logical endpoint, that since nature demands unity, the only valid geopolitical structure is a single, globally unified caliphate operating under one law, dedicated to a system of social justice where not even a street dog is deprived of its natural rights.
It is a relentlessly logical, hermetically sealed philosophical system that completely redefines the vocabulary of modern global politics. It strips away the comforts of secular consensus and demands absolute alignment with what it views as the base code of reality.
It really does.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
We live in a world that prides itself on being hyper-rational. We like to believe that in the modern era, we have stripped away ancient superstitions and replaced them with enlightened civic duty. But this source document forces us to hold a mirror up to our own rituals.
Regardless of your own political leanings, whether you agree with a single word of this flowchart or you reject its premise entirely, it demands that you look critically at the symbols you surround yourself with every single day. Think about the flags waving outside your local post office. Think about the constitutions, the national anthems, the solemn pledges of allegiance.
When we grant these human-made concepts the absolute, unquestioned authority to dictate what is right and wrong in our society, when we allow them to demand our ultimate sacrifice in war or justify systemic economic exploitation through banking systems in the name of the national interest, are we truly as rational and enlightened as we think we are? Or are we, as this profound document claims, simply participating in a highly sophisticated, deeply entrenched form of modern idol worship?
What is the true base code that governs your world? Is it nature, or is it a myth disguised as a nation? It is a hairy, unsettling question, but that is exactly why we do these deep dives. Thank you for joining us on this rigorous exploration of the source material. Keep questioning the structures of the world around you, keep looking for the hidden logic beneath the surface of the everyday, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.